Hey everybody, I'm getting ready to start putting the steering box back in the Mustang. I'll show you a few things in a couple of minutes here. I got the steering box back and I'll just show you a couple of moments and then I'm going to go back and get it installed. This is a tough job, but I'm going to go at it. I can't show you the whole job because, shucks. It's tight quarters in there and it's hard enough for me to get a hand in sometimes, much less a camera. So I'll show you a few things as I go. But my goal is that it's time to get the Mustang back on the road. And here goes. My Mustang steering box came back. And it's all rebuilt. It's all cleaned up pretty now. And I would say that looks like it was painted. Probably blasted and painted. But nice and clean all together. It comes with a tag that says do not add grease, do not adjust, drag set at 10 inch-pounds per factory specs at center, which is, yeah, when you do one of these adjustments, there's a high point in the center where it gets tight and then the mesh is looser on either side. The center point is where you want your steering to be most accurate, and so there's a very tight mesh there. And if you adjust this screw and you don't have it in the center and you don't have the right preload on it, you can damage things. So even though there's a screw there that looks like it's easy to adjust, you don't want to generally tinker with it. But anyway, I think, from the time I sent it till the time I got it back was about 2 weeks, and that included postal time. Pretty good. Because I sent it off as I was heading to get the Camaro to go to Wisconsin. And just for information, if you have a Ford steering box that you want to get fixed, this guy seems very knowledgeable. He said he's been in the business 40 years, and it's called Chockostang, Chockostang. And they're on Chalk Road in Murrayville, Illinois. And it cost me $215 plus shipping to get the box rebuilt. In my last video, I showed you what happened to this box and the needle bearing that broke. Before I mailed this to him, I called him up and said, this is what I've got, this is what I found in the box, to make sure that he agreed it was rebuildable was kind of my question. And when I described the bearing failure, he said, I've been doing this for 40 years and I've never seen one like that before. He said, that's a new one on me. So kind of odd to break one of these bearings that way. But I described the condition of my parts and that what I had seen in the video, what I had seen that I showed you in the video. And he said, yeah, it should be all good, just box it up and send it to me. And it was kind of funny. His comment was, he said, be careful, it's heavy, so when you box it up, he said, tape it really good. He said, then go have a beer and come back and tape it some more. Because he said a lot of people don't secure the box enough, don't pad it enough, and you'll end up with, the shaft sticking out through the box. So make sure it's, mine apparently made it. He got it back to me. So now one of my projects in the coming days, well, it might be more than the coming days, is I got to get it back in the Mustang and get the old girl back on the road again. Well, I'm working to finish getting the steering box back in the Mustang, and it's a fair bit of work. It's not easy to shoot video under here while I'm doing the work, so I'm just going to give you a couple comments. First of all, to get it down, to get the box out, required dropping the exhaust, removing the pitman arm, which is right there, and I was able to do it without removing it from the steering linkage. I only removed it from the gear, and with a little finagling was able to scoot the end of the pitman arm off by flexing the steering linkage a little bit, just kind of making one of the front wheels turn in a little bit, and we'll see how easy it is to get it back on. But right now you can kind of see the hole back here where this is where you have to get the steering gear out on one of these dudes with a 428 anyway. You can kind of see the manifold, and that bolt in the very upper left is kind of the tight spot. So the gear, which you can see there with the bolts sticking out, the silver part, that's the steering gear. And to get it out, you have to slide it and turn it back into this hole in the back, and then wiggle it a lot and get it, because it's laying on top of that frame rail, and you have to turn it and get it off the frame rail and down out through this opening where the clutch linkage normally goes. So the clutch linkage crossbar is in there too. I was really worried about getting that gear back in, but I managed to do it. It took me a little work. It's heavy because you gotta, it weighs about 20 pounds, and you're trying to lift it, squeeze it up into that hole, and then, like I say, you end up putting it in almost as far to the back as you can go, and then sliding it forward. And then the flex coupling I leave unbolted so that it can slide on the shaft on the spline. That causes some trouble because actually I had to put the gear in twice because I had to bring it out halfway a second time because the coupling fell off. But if you don't let it slide, you get about an extra 1/8 or 1/4 inch of travel, and you got to scoot that steering box in front of the flange on the steering shaft from the steering column. So the gear's got to go way forward, and you kind of have to rotate the gear, put the pins of the coupling into the slots on the flange by rolling it, and then you get it all together. Now, I haven't got the bolts up on the frame here. There are 3 bolts. They're not torqued yet. That's one of my next jobs. And I'll just say so as I'm going through this, the gear to side rail bolts, I've got an old shop manual from back in the day, and it says I need to do 50 to 65 foot-pounds on those 3 bolts that hold that in. When I go to bolt the pitman arm back onto the end of the shaft right there, that one's supposed to be 150 to 225. They want 15 to 20 on the frame bolts when you put the clutch linkage brackets back together. And I kind of got those laying right there, because you have to take the engine bracket off right there. It goes right there. And then you have to take the bracket off that's laying on top of the frame. Or you don't have enough clearance to get the gear out. So as we go back together, I'm going to torque the gear. I have already aligned the steering wheel up on the high point of the friction spot, and the steering is pointed straight ahead. So then this pitman arm, I ought to be able to rotate that pitman arm and put her right on that spline. Now that may be, again, a little easier said than done. It's probably going to take some wiggling to get the splines to engage. Oh, and then I'll have to get the clutch linkage in place. And I think the way I took it apart, I think the clutch linkage goes in next, and then the exhaust system will go up last. And that's the underneath stuff, and then I have to go up under hood. We can take a look at that too. So you can see there that I have the flange engaged with the steering column. There are 2 bolts, those bolts that connect the flex joint to the flange. Then you've got that one, which has a 12-point head on it, which means it needs a 12-point socket. And that one you really want to be sure that you have torqued. That one goes in that opening right down in the bottom at the center of the picture. I probably want to have that bolt started before I put these in and bolt up the flex coupling, because it does need to go in a slot or in a groove on the steering shaft. But I will tell you from experience, it's absolutely necessary to put a torque wrench on that bolt. I had that bolt come loose on me one time. I had bolted it together. It's very hard to get a torque wrench on there. it's way down, and I didn't have enough extensions, and so I torqued it by feel. Bad idea. The service manual says that that bolt should be 24 to 37. That's flex coupling to the gear. And it's a spline. And I'll tell you what happened to me is that spline, that bolt has a lot of stress on it. And it stretches like a spring. Because the spline that you have down there wants to expand when you put a lot of load on the steering wheel. And there's a reason that's a 12-point high-strength bolt. And if it isn't tight enough, it will let that joint flex, and eventually the bolt will back out, and then the steering, the spline pops over, and essentially you lose steering. The steering wheel will turn and the gear won't. And fortunately that one happened to me here in my driveway also, because if it happened on the road it would have been a really bad deal. So my solution was I had to go out and buy a couple more extensions so that I can get my extensions up here, so I can get a torque wrench on up here. I mean, it takes about 18 inches worth of extensions. But you really got to torque that dude, because if you don't, it's dangerous. They also want the frame bolts 15 to 20 on the clutch, and I always like to torque things, but some of these are going to be really hard to get a wrench on. I don't know if I'll be able to get a torque wrench. The flex coupling ones, they want 10 to 18, and again, I don't know if I can actually get a torque wrench on those flex coupling bolts because there's too much in the way, which is a risk I'm going to probably have to take. I'm going to see what I can do to get a torque wrench in there, but it's hard enough just to get hands in there. And then I'll have to check the clutch linkage clearance. They want that to be 0.178 at the linkage, and I haven't checked that in years. So somehow, I'm going to go down and I'm going to torque up the side rail bolts. Once I get that done, I'm going to get the pitman arm on and get that nut spun on. One of the reasons, there are two reasons I leave this bolt out. This one here. One is that I want to be able to slide the flex coupling back and forth on the shaft. And the second one is that because you have to torque that to, 30 foot-pounds or more, it's hard to hold the steering gear and get that kind of torque on it accurately. It's a whole lot easier to do once it's in the car. So that's kind of my scheme at it. I'm going to do side rail bolts, make sure the pitman arm lines up, drop this one in, get these other nuts started on the flex coupling. I want to make sure everything lines up. Really a tight squeeze on these 428s, because you just don't, with a power brake unit in there and everything, you got to put your arms down through the openings between the brake tubes, and it's a fun deal. But I'd like to get her back on the road before winter comes. So, all right. So now I need to get these bolts in the flex coupling, and you can see the sheet metal piece. Based on the book and based on how I took them out, it looks like these should go in this way, with the nut being on the back side of the steering column flange. So I'm going to see what I can do to get those guys in there. So now I'm going to try to get that bolt, that 12-point bolt, down on the gear, and you can see I got a stack of extensions to put my torque wrench on. I think earlier I had said I was going to put the pitman arm first, but I'm holding off on the pitman arm because it's nice and easy to be able to spin the steering gear around to get the bolts in on the flex coupling and this one, and then I can straighten it up and put the pitman arm on in a bit. The flex coupling bolts, I'm having trouble getting a torque wrench on them, so right now I've got them as tight as I can, and I'm going to see if I can find another way to get a torque wrench on them later. But for right now, I want to get this one, and it needs to be 24 to 37, and My bias is to try to go to the high side on it. It's a 7/16 12-point socket. Let's see how we do here. And as I learned the hard way, make sure this dude is torqued to spec so that it doesn't come apart on you. When the steering wheel spline comes loose from the box, I can tell you, it is not any fun. What you're trying to do here is clamp this spline down. And you know, I thought I had it torqued as tight as I could get it without a torque wrench, but I needed to get the extra extensions so I could reach. Okay, and there's about 30. I'm going to go a little past 30, about 32, 33. That ought to hold it. Alright, so now there's the steering box. It's all back in there. The clutch linkage is reattached. I left the pitman arm till absolutely last because it gave me more clearance. I did have some challenges getting the one of the bushings and retainers came off on the clutch cross shaft. So I had to take that out a couple times and get it redone. The sequence of things as I was putting it back together, I started with the clutch linkage and realized that was wrong. So number one, the pitman arm's right above me. I put that on last. But the first thing I did was get the exhaust system connected, which is easier said than done because it was disconnected at the front, and then for clearance I had to disconnect it all the way back at the mufflers in the rear. The floor jack was supporting the mufflers to keep the angle close, so I had to connect the exhaust up front loosely, then go to the back and reinstall the hangers and get them up where they belonged, and then come back to the front and torque up the exhaust. Once that was done, this clutch cross shaft had to go in. Before I put the exhaust in, I installed the bracket on the engine side and torqued it up because I had good clearance to do that. Then the exhaust, then the cross shaft, which you see there. And there's a bracket on the frame that goes on the top of the frame with a bushing on it. That bracket has to go on last. And then you kind of got to reach over the top of the exhaust back here to tighten the bolts on the frame bracket and slide it over toward the engine so that it's snug, to the snug side. The shaft isn't tight. It slides side to side. And then the lower clutch linkage, the upper assist spring, and then finally the pitman arm. And it was a little extra fun because I did not disconnect the pitman arm from the steering linkage, only from the box. So getting the splines lined up perfectly so you could slide it back on was hard. I had my wife at the steering wheel and I could sight through the clearance in the spline, and I had her work the steering wheel very slowly and gently till I got it lined up, and then I was able to, with a mallet, very gently tap it on once it was lined up. And once I got it started just a little, I didn't need to tap it any further. It slid right on. It was just getting it through the first, getting it started. And once it was started, she slid right on. I got my honking torque wrench and got that to torque to about 160. They want 150 to, I forget, 220 or something. I stopped at the lower end, but I got about 160 on it. And so that's all torqued up. Clutch is there. I may have to come back and do some adjustment, but it feels like it's okay at the pedal. So for right now, I still have at the back, I still have the tailpipe brackets at the very back of the car that I need to reinstall. And then I'm going to go fire it up and see how it works, but that'll probably be a little later in the day. Clean up my tools, and we'll be good. The steering job is done. I'm just back from my from about a 15-mile shakedown run, and seems like all is good. I'm gonna go put it back up on the ramps and just crawl underneath and kind of do a visual and make sure that everything still looks good. But steering box is replaced and show looks good. So, hey, if you like my videos, please like and subscribe and help out my channel. Be much appreciated. That's all for now.